Question 106. While physically pulling instruments for a parathyroidectomy, an SP technician breaks down the prefix para to determine where the surgeon will be operating relative to the main thyroid gland. Based on this linguistic element, the technician understands the target anatomical structures are physically located in which exact relationship to the thyroid? A. Positioned completely above or over the main gland. B. Situated physically beside or near the primary structure. C. Located strictly beneath or under the primary organ. D. Placed entirely within or inside the gland boundaries. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. In medical terminology, the prefix para is derived from Greek and translates directly to beside, near, or abnormal. Therefore, the parathyroid glands are anatomically situated physically adjacent to or beside the primary thyroid gland in the patient neck. Image of the thyroid and parathyroid glands. Trap analysis. Option A. The prefix for above or over is hyper or supra. This option would be correct if the technician was reading a physical surgical request for a supraclavicular lymph node dissection located above the collarbone. Option C. The prefix for beneath or under is hypo or sub. This option would be correct if the technician was assembling a physical instrument tray tailored for a submandibular gland excision located under the jaw. Option D. The prefix for within or inside is endo or intra. This option would be correct if the technician was preparing a specialized set of physical cameras for an endoscopic procedure examining the inside of the digestive tract. Concept extension. A technician with a strong grasp of anatomical prefixes can rapidly deduce exactly which specialized physical retractors and dissecting tools a surgeon will require, vastly accelerating the case cart building process. Question 107. While actively unloading a soiled case cart at the decontamination sink, a veteran SP technician explains to a trainee that the physical process of breaking down bioburden does not actually commence in their department. According to standard infection control protocols, the very first physical phase of removing gross soil officially begins at which specific location? A. Inside the automated mechanical washer disinfector during the enzymatic phase. B. At the prep and pack workstation during the lighted magnifier inspection. C. Directly at the point of use within the active operating room suite. D. On the designated facility loading dock upon receiving a vendor loaner set. Correct answer C. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Decontamination is a multi-step continuous cycle that officially initiates the moment a surgical procedure concludes. Operating room staff must perform point-of-use treatment, physically wiping away heavy blood and tissues and applying a moisture-retaining spray, establishing the absolute first step of the cleaning process before the cart ever rolls into the sterile processing corridors. Trap analysis. Option A. The mechanical washer is a secondary advanced step utilizing physical, thermal, and chemical action. This option would be correct if the scenario asked where the primary automated thermal disinfection phase is executed. Option B. The prep and pack station handles clean instruments, not initial physical bioburden removal. This option would be correct if asking where the physical functional testing and alignment of scissors and clamps actively occurs. Option D. The loading dock is an administrative receiving point, not a physical clinical cleaning zone. This option would be correct if asking where the external ownership of a newly purchased batch of rigid containers transfers to the hospital internal logistics team. Concept extension. If point-of-use treatment is neglected in the surgical suite, the blood physically dries into a hardened crust, requiring the decontamination technician to spend significantly more time manually scrubbing to prevent sterilization cycle failure. Question 108. While physically scanning the barcode of a returned surgical tray into the tracking system, an SP technician reads an alert regarding a patient who developed a severe systemic fever several days after a prolonged orthopedic surgery. To be officially classified by facility epidemiologists as a healthcare-associated infection, the patient's symptoms must have physically emerged strictly on or after which specific chronological timeline during their admission? A. On or after the third physical day of their hospital stay. B. Exactly 24 hours following the initial surgical incision. C. Within the first 48 hours of occupying a recovery room bed. D. Only after the patient has been physically discharged and sent home. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. A healthcare-associated infection is an illness a patient acquires while receiving medical treatment in a facility. To differentiate these from community-acquired infections the patient already carried, standard epidemiological guidelines dictate that the infection must manifest on or after day 3 of the patient hospitalization to be officially linked to the facility care environment. Trap analysis. Option B. 24 hours is too rapid to definitively prove the pathogen was acquired inside the hospital rather than physically brought in by the patient. This option would be correct if asking about the typical chronological timeline for an acute immediate allergic reaction to general anesthesia. Option C. Symptoms arising within the first 48 hours are generally classified as community-acquired because the incubation period aligns with pre-admission exposure. This option would be correct if defining the absolute maximum time a heavily soiled flexible endoscope can sit before requiring complete manual physical reprocessing. Option D. Infections can and do physically manifest while the patient is still actively occupying a hospital bed. This option would be correct if the scenario was tracking a delayed post-operative surgical site infection that only became physically visible weeks after the initial discharge date. Concept extension. Sterile processing technicians play a paramount role in lowering healthcare-associated infection rates by physically ensuring every surgical instrument arriving in the operating room is completely devoid of microscopic pathogens. Question 109. Upon physically receiving a highly contaminated flexible colonoscope at the dedicated reprocessing sink, an SP technician must actively initiate the multi-step cleaning sequence. Before ever submerging the delicate insertion tube into the prepared enzymatic detergent bath, the technician is strictly mandated to execute which exact mechanical procedure first? A. Pushing a long nylon bristle brush through the internal biopsy channel. B. Flushing the internal lumens with an orthophthalaldehyde high-level disinfectant. C. Performing a pressurized pneumatic leak test to verify external sheath integrity. D. Wiping the exterior optic lens with a sterile alcohol-saturated sponge. Correct answer C. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Flexible endoscopes feature complex watertight internal mechanics that are easily destroyed by fluid intrusion. Therefore, the absolute first step before any physical immersion or wet cleaning can begin is a pneumatic leak test, utilizing air pressure to physically verify there are no holes or tears in the device outer protective sheath. Trap analysis. Option A. Brushing the channels while submerged introduces fluid, which will catastrophically flood the scope if a leak is present. This option would be correct if asking for the primary mechanical action physically performed immediately following a successful past leak test. Option B. High-level disinfection is a later phase executed only after all physical soils have been scrubbed and rinsed away. This option would be correct if asking for the specific chemical step physically performed just prior to the final critical water rinse in an automated reprocessor. Option D. Wiping the lens does not check the overall waterproof integrity of the entire instrument shaft. This option would be correct if asking for the final physical step a surgeon takes to ensure visual clarity immediately before physically inserting the camera into a patient. Concept extension. If the colonoscope fails the initial leak test by generating continuous air bubbles underwater, the technician must immediately halt processing, physically dry the exterior, and dispatch the compromised instrument for specialized biomedical repair. Question 110. While physically securing a lightweight retractor inside a transparent plastic peel pouch at the assembly station, a trainee attempts to reinforce the closure flap using a long strip of chemical indicator tape. The supervising SP technician immediately intervenes and prohibits this specific adhesive practice because it directly causes which dangerous operational failure in the operating room? A. It physically traps residual steam moisture inside the package leading to a wet pack. B. It severely hinders the scrub nurse ability to execute a flawless aseptic removal of the item. C. It chemically reacts with the plastic film and melts the polymer directly onto the instrument. D. It completely blocks the external sterilant gas from penetrating the porous paper backing. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Peel pouches are precisely manufactured to be peeled apart cleanly, allowing the unsterile circulating nurse to drop the internal sterile instrument onto a sterile field without physical contact. Applying adhesive tape forces the nurse to violently rip, tear, or physically cut through the seal, completely destroying the aseptic presentation dynamic and risking massive contamination of the sterile surgical setup. Trap analysis. Option A. Tape on the closure flap does not trap internal moisture across the entire pouch surface. Improper sizing or overloading causes wet packs. This option would be correct if the trainee had physically placed a solid plastic silicone mat tightly inside a closed rigid container. Option C. Medical indicator tape is designed to withstand autoclave heat without melting standard peel pouch plastics. This option would be correct if the trainee utilized standard domestic residential masking tape entirely unrated for extreme physical sterilization temperatures. Option D. A single strip of tape on the flap does not cover the entire porous paper backing to physically block gas. This option would be correct if the trainee had physically placed a peel pouch entirely flat, plastic side down inside a solid stainless steel basin. Concept extension. Peel pouches must only be sealed utilizing built-in self-adhesive strips or validated mechanical heat sealers to ensure the closure is physically strong enough to survive the sterilization vacuum but clean enough to peel flawlessly. Question 111. While physically inspecting a multi-part orthopedic bone biopsy needle at the prep and pack workstation, the SP technician classifies the device according to the Spalding system. Knowing this specific device is designed to physically penetrate sterile human bone tissue and enter the vascular system, what exact physical processing must it undergo prior to patient use? A. High-level disinfection utilizing orthothialdehyde. B. Intermediate-level disinfection with a phenolic solution. C. Low-level environmental surface disinfection. D. Terminal sterilization to eradicate all microbial life. Correct answer D. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. According to the Spalding classification system, any medical device that physically enters sterile tissue or the vascular system is categorized as a critical item. Because these items pose the highest risk of transmitting infection, they must strictly undergo terminal sterilization to ensure they are 100% devoid of all living microorganisms, including highly resistant bacterial spores. Trap analysis. Option A. High-level disinfection is the requirement for semi-critical items that only physically touch mucous membranes. This option would be correct if the technician was processing a flexible respiratory bronchoscope. Option B. Intermediate-level disinfection is insufficient for instruments entering sterile bone. This option would be correct if the technician was physically wiping down the exterior metallic rails of a surgical patient transport stretcher. Option C. Low-level disinfection is reserved for non-critical items touching only intact skin. This option would be correct if the technician was physically cleaning a blood pressure cuff returning from the outpatient clinic. Concept extension. If a critical item is heat-sensitive, the technician cannot downgrade it to disinfection. Instead, they must physically utilize a low-temperature sterilization method such as ethylene oxide or vaporized hydrogen peroxide. Question 112. An SP technician is physically inspecting the exterior metal shell, or jacket, that surrounds the internal chamber of a newly installed steam sterilizer. By physically filling this external gap with steam prior to the actual exposure phase, the machine achieves which specific physical benefit for the surgical instrument loads? A. It allows the heavy equipment to be physically safely installed inside a standard decontamination area. B. It minimizes internal condensation by ensuring the chamber walls are hot when steam enters. C. It actively produces additional steam vapor as the internal atmosphere naturally cools. D. It functions as a mechanical safety relief valve to prevent the chamber from exploding. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. The primary purpose of a steam sterilizer jacket is to preheat the internal chamber walls. When hot pressurized steam is physically injected into a cold chamber, it immediately turns into liquid water condensate, resulting in wet packs. The heated jacket ensures that the steam contacts a hot surface, drastically reducing condensation and facilitating a more efficient sterilization process. Trap analysis. Option A. Equipment weight and facility placement are handled by structural engineers, not the jacket steam function. This option would be correct if the technician was reviewing the physical floor loading capacity for the decontamination room. Option C. The jacket distributes heat, the facility boiler or a dedicated generator produces the actual steam. This option would be correct if the technician was physically opening the main steam valve located in the facility mechanical basement. Option D. Safety relief valves are separate mechanical components, not the jacket itself. This option would be correct if the technician was identifying the specific hardware that physically vents excess pressure if the machine sensors fail. Concept extension. Maintaining the jacket at a constant temperature throughout the day allows the facility to run multiple back-to-back cycles without having to wait for the chamber walls to physically warm up each time. Question 113. While physically loading a mixed batch of surgical supplies onto a sterilizer carriage, an SP technician must arrange heavy rigid aluminum containers and lightweight wrapped textile bundles. To prevent physical moisture contamination, or wet packs, where exactly must the technician place the rigid containers on the racks? A. Positioned strictly on the bottom shelf of the load. B. Placed exclusively on the middle shelf between wrapped sets. C. Situated on the top shelf directly beneath the chamber ceiling. D. Arranged randomly throughout the load to maximize airflow. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. In a steam sterilizer, heavy metallic items like rigid containers generate significantly more condensation than fabric wraps. According to basic physics and loading standards, these hard goods must always be placed on the bottom shelves. This ensures that any liquid condensate physically dripping from the cold metal does not fall onto and saturate the absorbent wrapped packages beneath them, which would cause an immediate sterile barrier failure. Trap analysis. Option B. Placing containers in the middle still risks dripping onto any items on the shelf below. This option would be correct if the technician was grouping items solely by the surgical specialty physically listed on their labels. Option C. Placing heavy metal goods on the top shelf guarantees they will drip onto every other item in the carriage. This option would be correct if the technician was physically loading lightweight paper plastic peel pouches that allow rapid air removal. Option D. Random loading creates chaotic steam patterns and physically causes widespread wet packs. This option would be correct if describing a complete lack of standardized physical training regarding autoclave thermodynamics. Concept extension. If multiple rigid containers are used, the technician must physically ensure they are not stacked directly on top of each other unless the manufacturer instructions for use explicitly validate that specific physical configuration. Question 114. While physically pulling a specialized retractor set from the storage racks, an SP technician notes the surgical schedule lists a herniorrhaphy for the next case. By interpreting the medical suffix of this procedure, the technician knows the surgeon will execute which precise mechanical action. A. Physically repairing a muscle layer allowing an organ to project through an opening. B. Performing a structural reconstruction of a damaged shoulder joint. C. Physically removing a biopsy sample of potentially diseased tissue. D. Artificially fusing two separate fibrous membranes together. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Decoding medical terms allows technicians to physically provide the correct tools. The root word hernio refers to a hernia, and the suffix raphathy means to suture or surgically repair. Therefore, A herniorrhaphy is the physical surgical repair of a hernia, requiring the technician to prioritize anatomical retractors and needle holders in the case cart. Trap analysis. Option B, reconstruction of a joint involves the suffix plasty. This option would be correct if the technician was pulling physical instruments for a total hip arthroplasty. Option C, removing a sample for testing defines a biopsy, not a repair. This option would be correct if the technician was preparing a small specimen container and a physical scalpel for a suspicious dermal lesion excision. Option D, fusing tissues together without a repair context is not the definition of this term. This option would be correct if the technician was assembling a spinal fusion set featuring specialized pedicle screws and physical bone graft material. Concept extension. For a herniorrhaphy, the technician must also physically ensure the cart contains various sizes of synthetic surgical mesh, as modern repairs often utilize this physical barrier to reinforce the abdominal wall. Question 115. While physically referencing a printed association for the advancement of medical instrumentation manual to properly configure the internal baskets of a heavy orthopedic tray, the SP technician understands these specific voluntary guidelines are primarily physically developed based on which foundational principle? A. Providing strict guidelines for legally required levels of clinical service. B. Synthesizing current scientific evidence to establish industry best practice. C. Creating enforceable statutes that carry immediate criminal penalties. D. Formulating internal facility rules specifically followed by the federal government. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Voluntary standards, such as those published by the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, are not laws. Instead, they are high-level guidelines physically authored by industry experts who synthesize the latest scientific research and clinical evidence to define the best practice, the safest and most effective known way to physically process instruments. Trap analysis. Option A. Voluntary standards provide recommendations, not legal requirements for service levels. This option would be correct if describing the physical function of a state healthcare licensing board mandatory statutes. Option C. Professional associations have no legal authority to enforce criminal penalties. This option would be correct if the technician was reviewing the physical enforcement powers of a federal police agency or a court of law. Option D. The federal government issues its own recommendations, it does not follow internal facility rules. This option would be correct if asking what organization physically tracks the nationwide transmission of drug-resistant pathogens. Concept extension. Although these standards are voluntary, if a hospital physically violates them and a patient is harmed, a court of law will often utilize these best practice guidelines as the gold standard to determine if the facility was professionally negligent. Question 116. While physically walking through the prep and pack area holding a ruggedized waterproof tablet, an SP technician actively logs the assembly progress of a major orthopedic set without returning to a stationary desk. This specific technological behavior physically demonstrates which modern operational advancement in the department? A. It proves that digital hardware violates standard infection control protocols due to the inability to physically submerge the touchscreen. B. It indicates that computerized tracking is strictly restricted to the sterile storage zone for physical inventory cycle counting. C. It actively enhances continuous workflow by utilizing facility-approved mobile point-of-use computing solutions. D. It permanently replaces the physical requirement for technicians to manually inspect the functionality of hinged surgical instruments. Correct answer C. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Point-of-use computing refers to utilizing mobile digital solutions, such as tablets or computers on wheels, directly at the physical workstation. Because modern medical-grade devices are designed to withstand rigorous physical surface disinfection, technicians can actively access pick lists, assembly instructions, and tracking software exactly where the physical work is being performed, drastically improving workflow efficiency. Trap analysis. Option A. Medical-grade tablets are completely sealed and safely disinfected with approved surface wipes, meeting infection control standards without physical submersion. This option would be correct if the technician was attempting to physically use a personal unsealed consumer smartphone at the decontamination sink. Option B. Mobile tracking is deployed universally across all physical operational zones, including decontamination and assembly, not just sterile storage. This option would be correct if describing a specific software module that exclusively calculates the monetary depreciation of physically stored consumable wrappers. Option D. No software can physically replace the manual human inspection required to verify instrument cleanliness and mechanical integrity. This option would be correct if describing a hypothetical artificial intelligence scanner specifically validated by the FDA to visually clear physical bioburden. Concept extension. Implementing point-of-use computing effectively eliminates the physical bottleneck of technicians lining up at a single shared terminal to physically scan barcodes or print count sheets. Question 117. While physically operating a newly installed computerized tracking scanner at the assembly prep station, an SP technician pulls out their personal smartphone and snaps a selfie with the advanced machinery to upload to a public networking application. To maintain strict professional standards and comply with healthcare laws, the technician must execute which absolute physical verification before posting? A. The technician must physically ensure the image contains zero unauthorized depictions of patients or facility layouts to prevent severe privacy violations. B. The technician must verify that any captured biohazard containers are digitally altered to display a completely different warning color. C. The technician must remove the identification badge because taking personal photographs anywhere on hospital grounds is a federal criminal offense. D. The technician must explicitly caption the image to actively engage in public debates regarding the facility internal infection control failures. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Professionalism extends strictly into digital environments. Sterile processing staff must ensure any social media activity does not inadvertently violate patient privacy laws or breach internal facility security policies. Even a background physical reflection showing a patient chart or an unauthorized restricted area layout can constitute a severe fireable offense. Trap analysis. Option B. Altering warning colors digitally is irrelevant. The physical layout of the facility should not be broadcast without express permission. This option would be correct if the scenario asked what digital alteration a graphic designer must make to an incorrect manufacturer label before physically printing a new batch. Option C. Taking a personal photo in a locker room is typically governed by local facility human resources policy, not universal federal criminal law. This option would be correct if the technician was caught physically stealing narcotics from an operating room dispensing machine. Option D. Healthcare professionals are explicitly trained to avoid heated online debates regarding their employers to maintain public trust and professional decorum. This option would be correct if describing the deliberate physical actions of an adversarial legal prosecutor. Concept extension. When in doubt, the most universally secure professional action is to never physically photograph or post any physical environment or proprietary equipment located within the hospital boundaries. Question 118. While physically sorting a heavily soiled plastic surgery tray at the decontamination sink, an SP technician encounters a tangled pile of instruments obscuring the bottom of the wire basket. To strictly adhere to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration mandates regarding sharps injuries, which specific mechanical interaction must the technician execute? A. The technician must aggressively shake the basket entirely underwater to physically dislodge any hidden scalpel blades. B. The technician must absolutely refrain from blindly reaching their hands into the tray to prevent accidental puncture injuries. C. The technician must immediately dump the entire metallic contents of the basket directly onto the stainless steel sorting counter. D. The technician must physically submerge their bare hands into the enzymatic soak to tactily locate the sharp items. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. sharp safety is a paramount physical requirement in the decontamination zone. Because blood and opaque enzymatic detergents frequently obscure the physical bottom of basins and trays, technicians are explicitly trained never to blindly reach into any container. Doing so creates an immense risk of being physically punctured by a hidden needle, skin hook, or scalpel blade, leading directly to a bloodborne pathogen exposure. Trap analysis. Option A. Shaking instruments physically damages delicate tips and generates hazardous aerosolized splashes into the technician breathing zone. This option would be correct if describing the mechanical agitation action generated by a physical sonic irrigator machine. Option C. Dumping instruments aggressively causes severe physical damage, dulls sharp edges, and creates uncontrollable biohazard splatters. This option would be correct if describing how a mechanized conveyor belt physically ejects processed trash into an incinerator chute. Option D. Submerging bare hands into a biohazard soak is a catastrophic physical violation of personal protective equipment laws. This option would be correct if the scenario asked what specific physical action instantly guarantees a technician will be subjected to disciplinary termination. Concept extension. To safely extract instruments from an obscured tray, the technician should physically utilize sponge forceps to securely grasp and lift individual items out of the opaque fluid one at a time. Question 119. While physically packing an overnight travel bag with their facility uniform and continuing education logbook, an SP technician prepares to board a flight to attend the annual National Professional Sterile Processing Association convention. By committing personal time and finances to these external endeavors, the technician is physically executing which specific professional trajectory? A. Fulfilling the legally mandated physical tracking requirements dictated by the federal government. B. Automatically bypassing the facility standard 90-day probationary period for new clinical employees. C. Executing proactive steps to attain advanced career goals and actively build an industry network. D. Assuming immediate legal accountability for all continuous infection control audits within their hospital. Correct answer C. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Professional associations offer voluntary avenues for technicians to explicitly expand their clinical knowledge, discover emerging physical sterilization technologies, and network with peers. Actively participating in these groups and physically traveling to conventions demonstrates a high level of motivation and represents a deliberate proactive effort to advance one's professional development and long-term career goals. Trap analysis. Option A. Joining an association is entirely voluntary. No federal law mandates convention attendance for basic employment. This option would be correct if the technician was physically completing an OSHA-mandated bloodborne pathogen training module. Option B. External networking does not override internal human resources policies like probationary periods. This option would be correct if the technician physically signed a legally binding executive contract that explicitly waived the standard observation period. Option D. Membership in a professional group does not transfer legal facility auditing liability to a frontline technician. This option would be correct if the technician successfully applied for and accepted the official physical title of Hospital Infection Prevention Director. Concept extension. Maintaining this professional networking trajectory ultimately increases the technician physical employability, making them a prime candidate when specialized promotional opportunities, such as an instrument tracking software administrator, arise within the facility. Question 120. After the physical installation of a brand new 600-pound dynamic air removal steam sterilizer, the facility engineering and sterile processing teams deliberately run 3 consecutive empty cycles featuring biological indicators before processing any live surgical trays. This mandatory physical testing protocol is executed by the hospital end users to achieve which exact quality assurance definition? A. An environmental operational risk management assessment. B. A primary manufacturer equipment validation protocol. C. A localized facility-level operational verification procedure. D. A routine preventative maintenance thermal calibration. Correct answer C. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. According to standards, there is a strict distinction between validation and verification. The hospital end user performs verification by physically running biological indicators in a newly installed or relocated machine. The facility is actively verifying that the equipment performs exactly as intended within their specific physical environment, plumbing, and steam conditions before trusting it with patient items. Trap analysis. Option A, risk management involves mitigating financial and legal hazards, not physically testing the lethality parameters of a new autoclave. This option would be correct if the team was physically calculating the potential financial liability of a sterilizer causing a severe staff burn injury. Option B, validation is strictly the legal responsibility of the original equipment manufacturer. They perform this complex testing in a factory laboratory before the machine is ever sold. This option would be correct if the scenario described engineers at the sterilizer factory physically compiling the initial clearance data for the FDA. Option D, preventative maintenance occurs on established running machines, not as the initial commissioning test for a brand new installation. This option would be correct if the engineer was physically adjusting the steam valves on a 5-year-old machine to stop the temperature from drifting. Concept extension. If the sterilizer undergoes major repairs, such as having its chamber welded or its main steam manifold replaced, this 3-cycle physical verification process must be entirely repeated to prove lethality is restored. Question 121. While physically scanning barcodes at the clean assembly workstation to track missing instrument errors, an SP technician enters the defect data into the department's Six Sigma quality management software. The technician understands that utilizing this specific statistical framework is physically geared toward achieving which ultimate operational outcome? A. Guaranteeing the complete elimination of all manual documentation requirements. B. Delivering a near-perfect physical product by reducing assembly defects to mathematically negligible levels. C. Implementing a reactive investigation only after a critical surgical delay has physically occurred. D. Standardizing the physical ergonomic layout of the prep and pack workstations. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Six Sigma is a highly structured data-driven quality management process. Its primary focus is on developing and delivering near-perfect products and services by identifying and eliminating the physical causes of defects, aiming for a statistical goal of no more than 3.4 defects per 1 million opportunities in the tray assembly workflow. Trap analysis. Option A. Quality frameworks rely heavily on data tracking and do not eliminate documentation. This option would be correct if the scenario described the administrative benefit of physically implementing a fully automated barcode scanning network across the facility. Option C. Six Sigma is a continuous proactive measurement process, not merely a reactive investigation. This option would be correct if the technician was utilizing a root cause analysis tool to manually investigate a physically dropped instrument tray. Option D. Ergonomics focuses on human physical comfort and injury prevention, not the overarching statistical quality of the processed instruments. This option would be correct if the department was physically executing an employee injury reduction plan by installing height-adjustable tables. Concept extension. To successfully apply Six Sigma principles, the technician must consistently collect accurate physical data on every single tray error found, creating a robust baseline to measure future quality improvements against. Question 122. While physically rotating stock on the sterile storage wire racks, an SP technician examines a commercially sterilized package of central venous catheters. The technician observes a standardized black symbol depicting a physical hourglass printed on the transparent plastic film. This specific geometric icon officially directs the technician to identify which exact piece of logistical data? A. The specific manufacturer lot control batch code. B. The physical expiration or use-by date of the sterile item. C. The absolute prohibition against physically reusing a single-use device. D. The exact calendar date the item was physically manufactured at the factory. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Medical packaging utilizes internationally standardized symbols to overcome language barriers. The hourglass symbol universally represents the use-by date or expiration date. The technician must physically read the date printed adjacent to this symbol to ensure the item is still viable and safe for patient use before deploying it to the operating room. Trap analysis. Option A. The batch code is denoted by a different symbol. This option would be correct if the technician was looking at the physical rectangle containing the capitalized letters lot. Option C. The prohibition against reuse is a distinct safety warning. This option would be correct if the technician was observing a circle containing the number 2 with a diagonal slash drawn physically through it. Option D. The manufacturing date indicates when the product was made, not when it expires. This option would be correct if the technician was physically locating the symbol shaped like a factory building with a smokestack. Concept extension. If the technician finds an hourglass symbol with a date that has already physically passed, they must immediately pull the item from the clean rack and discard it according to facility protocols to prevent an expired product from reaching a patient. Question 123. An SP technician is physically pushing a closed leak-proof transport cart containing a heavily soiled sequential compression device from the intensive care unit back to the decontamination area. To strictly comply with institutional infection prevention protocols, the technician must actively navigate the physical cart using which specific directional strategy? A. Utilizing the primary public passenger elevators to ensure the fastest possible physical return time. B. Selecting a dedicated service route that physically minimizes any passing contact with healthcare patrons and visitors. C. Pushing the cart through the semi-restricted clean corridors to bypass high-traffic public lobbies. D. Leaving the cart physically parked in the hallway outside the unit until a dedicated environmental services worker retrieves it. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Transporting biologically contaminated patient care equipment through a hospital poses a severe cross-contamination risk. Infection control policies strictly mandate that technicians must transport soiled items via designated low-traffic routes such as dedicated service elevators or back hallways to physically minimize any accidental contact with patients, visitors, and clean hospital inventory. Trap analysis. Option A. Speed does not override safety. Public elevators expose patrons to biohazardous carts. This option would be correct if the technician was physically transporting a stack of clean empty administrative paperwork boxes to the hospital basement. Option C. Soiled items must never physically enter clean corridors under any circumstance. This option would be correct if the technician was transporting a freshly assembled terminally sterilized surgical case cart directly to the operating room core. Option D. Unattended soiled equipment is a severe safety violation and cannot be abandoned in public hallways. This option would be correct if a nurse was physically placing sealed standard non-hazardous room trash outside a patient door for routine janitorial pickup. Concept extension. Before the technician even begins pushing the cart, they must physically ensure the soiled device is completely enclosed or covered with an impervious barrier to prevent any liquid spills onto the hospital floor during transit. Question 124. After physically draining and refilling the deep basin of the ultrasonic cleaner with fresh 110 Fahrenheit water and enzymatic detergent, the SP technician activates the machine while it is completely empty of surgical instruments. The technician physically executes this specific operational cycle to achieve which mandatory mechanical requirement? A. To physically degas the fluid by expelling trapped ambient air that would otherwise cushion the cavitation implosions. B. To thermally calibrate the internal thermostat sensors to prevent the enzymes from physically denaturing. C. To physically dissolve hardened mineral scaling that accumulated on the titanium transducers during the previous shift. D. To actively verify the sonic energy is successfully penetrating the hinged box locks of orthopedic clamps. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale: fresh tap water naturally contains dissolved gases. If these gases are not removed, they form microscopic air bubbles that physically absorb and cushion the high-frequency sound waves, completely destroying the cavitation process necessary for cleaning. Therefore, the technician must run an empty degassing cycle every time the water is changed to physically expel this trapped air before inserting any soiled instruments. Trap analysis. Option B. Thermostat calibration is a maintenance task, not a daily operational requirement performed by filling the tank. This option would be correct if a biomedical engineer was performing a 90-day preventive maintenance check on the machine internal heating elements. Option C. Mineral descaling requires specific acidic chemicals, not standard enzymatic detergent water. This option would be correct if the technician was running a specialized weekly acidic descaling cycle to physically clean the stainless steel basin itself. Option D. Cavitation testing requires an actual physical testing medium, not an empty tank. This option would be correct if the technician was physically dropping a piece of aluminum foil or a commercial verification vial directly into the active sonic bath to test energy distribution. Concept extension. If the technician fails to physically degass the fresh solution, the surgical instruments will emerge from the ultrasonic cleaner still coated in microscopic bioburden, guaranteeing a subsequent sterilization failure. Question 125. While manually scrubbing a flexible cystoscope at the decontamination sink, an SP preceptor warns a trainee about the severe risks of Pseudomonas aeruginosa, a resilient gram-negative bacterium that thrives in physically wet environments. The preceptor explicitly states that if the technician fails to properly dry the surrounding stainless steel counter, this specific pathogen will easily spread through which exact physical mechanism? A. Through airborne droplet transmission when the technician physically sneezes over the sorting area. B. Through direct physical vector-borne transmission via insects entering the washroom. C. Through direct and indirect physical contact via unwashed hands and contaminated inanimate surfaces. D. Through the physical inhalation of aerosolized dry dust particles kicked up from the facility floor. Correct answer C. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale: Pseudomonas bacteria are notorious opportunistic pathogens that flourish in moisture. They do not fly through the air, rather, they are physically transmitted through contact. If a wet sink counter is contaminated, the bacteria will easily transfer to the technician hands through direct contact or onto the next instrument placed on that wet surface through indirect contact fomite transmission. Trap analysis. Option A. Droplet transmission involves respiratory secretions, which is not the primary mechanism for Pseudomonas. This option would be correct if the preceptor was explaining the transmission of the influenza virus from an infected staff member physically coughing. Option B. Vector-borne transmission relies on living pests like mosquitoes or ticks. This option would be correct if the scenario described the physical transmission mechanism of malaria or Lyme disease. Option D. Pseudomonas requires moisture and does not thrive in dry dust. This option would be correct if the preceptor was explaining how tuberculosis bacteria or fungal spores physically spread when dry drywall dust is disturbed during a hospital renovation. Concept extension. To break this specific chain of infection, the technician must physically utilize an EPA-registered intermediate-level environmental disinfectant to wipe down and completely dry all stainless steel sink counters between processing different surgical sets. Question 126. While physically verifying the environmental controls at the entrance of the soiled receiving area, an SP technician must confirm the heating and ventilation system is actively maintaining which specific atmospheric parameter? A. Negative airflow pressure continuously pulling corridor air inward. B. Positive airflow pressure aggressively pushing internal air outward. C. Zero hourly air exchanges to completely seal in biohazardous aerosols. D. A completely static atmosphere featuring exclusively unfiltered ambient air. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. The decontamination area is the most biologically hazardous zone in the sterile processing department. To prevent airborne microscopic pathogens from physically drifting into clean areas, the ventilation system must maintain negative pressure. This physical engineering control guarantees that whenever doors are opened, clean ambient air is forcefully pulled into the dirty room, completely preventing contaminated bioaerosols from escaping outward. Trap analysis. Option B. Positive pressure pushes air outward, which would physically blow infectious aerosols directly into the clean hospital corridors. This option would be correct if the technician was physically verifying the atmospheric controls for the sterile storage room protecting terminally sterilized packages. Option C. Zero air exchanges would physically suffocate the staff and allow toxic chemical fumes to reach lethal concentrations. This option would be correct if the scenario described a facility shutting down a room ventilation entirely to smother an active chemical fire. Option D. A static unfiltered atmosphere provides zero infection control. This option would be correct if the technician was standing in a physically abandoned non-clinical external storage shed. Concept extension. Alongside maintaining negative pressure, the decontamination area must also physically achieve a minimum of 10 air exchanges per hour to continuously exhaust toxic enzymatic fumes and bioaerosols safely to the outside of the building. Question 127. An SP technician is physically preparing to load a delicate heat-sensitive camera into a vaporized hydrogen peroxide system. Before initiating this low-temperature sterilization cycle, the technician must ensure the device has completely undergone which mandatory physical prerequisite? A. It has been thoroughly manually and mechanically cleaned. B. It has been physically heated to exactly 140 degrees Fahrenheit. C. It has been intentionally filled with pressurized ambient air. D. It has been terminally sterilized in a pre-vacuum autoclave. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. The absolute fundamental rule of all sterile processing is that an item cannot be sterilized until it is perfectly clean. Microscopic layers of dried blood or organic tissue act as physical shields that completely block low-temperature sterilant gases from touching the underlying metal. Therefore, meticulous manual and mechanical cleaning is the non-negotiable physical prerequisite for any sterilization modality. Trap analysis. Option B. Heating a heat-sensitive camera destroys its internal electronics. This option would be correct if the technician was physically monitoring the water temperature parameters required to successfully activate an enzymatic sink detergent. Option C. Filling the chamber with air prevents the deep vacuum required to draw the hydrogen peroxide vapor into narrow lumens. This option would be correct if the technician was utilizing an instrument air hose to physically verify the patency of a surgical drill internal channel. Option D. Steam autoclaves utilize extreme heat that permanently destroys plastic cameras. This option would be correct if the technician was physically packing heavy stainless steel orthopedic bone retractors into a rigid aluminum container. Concept extension. Following the physical cleaning process, the technician must also ensure the camera is perfectly bone dry, as even a single microscopic drop of water will vaporize under vacuum and cause the hydrogen peroxide machine to automatically abort the cycle. Question 128. While physically assembling a cardiovascular tray, an SP technician inspects a heavy-duty needle holder featuring distinctive gold-plated ring handles. The technician knows these specific handles indicate the instrument distal working jaws are physically reinforced with which exceptionally hard metallic insert? A. Tungsten carbide. B. Standard austenitic stainless steel. C. Non-magnetic lightweight titanium. D. Pure elemental gold. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Needle holders require extremely strong jaws to physically grip and drive curved surgical needles through dense tissue without slipping or bending. To achieve this durability, manufacturers weld inserts of tungsten carbide, an incredibly dense and hard metal alloy, into the jaws. The industry universally signifies the presence of this expensive physical enhancement by plating the instrument ring handles in gold. Trap analysis. Option B. Standard stainless steel is softer and wears down quickly when constantly grinding against steel surgical needles. This option would be correct if the technician was inspecting a basic towel clamp featuring completely bare silver-colored ring handles. Option C. Titanium is lightweight and non-magnetic, but it is not commonly used as a jaw insert on standard heavy needle holders. This option would be correct if the technician was physically picking up an exceptionally light blue anodized microsurgical forceps designed for safe use inside an MRI machine. Option D. Gold is an extremely soft metal that would instantly crush and deform if used to grip a steel needle. This option would be correct if describing the purely cosmetic plating applied exclusively to the proximal ring handles for visual identification purposes. Concept extension. When physically testing the functionality of a tungsten carbide needle holder at the assembly station, the technician must close the jaws to the first ratchet click and hold them up to the light to ensure no microscopic gaps are visible between the hardened inserts. Question 129. An SP technician is evaluating a mixed cart of surgical items to determine which ones can be safely loaded into a vaporized hydrogen peroxide gas plasma sterilizer. Which specific item can the technician physically process in this low-temperature chemical chamber without causing an immediate cycle abort? A. A semi-critical flexible fiber optic endoscope. B. A tightly folded stack of woven muslin surgical gowns. C. A dense package of highly absorbent cotton gauze sponges. D. A surgical tray wrapped in heavy-duty cellulose linens. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Vaporized hydrogen peroxide is explicitly engineered for items that are highly sensitive to physical heat and moisture. A flexible fiber optic endoscope consists of delicate plastics, internal optics, and polymer tubing that would instantly melt in a steam autoclave. Therefore, as long as the manufacturer physical instructions validate it, this scope is the perfect candidate for low-temperature gas plasma processing. Trap analysis. Option B. Woven muslin aggressively absorbs the chemical sterilant out of the atmospheric chamber. This option would be correct if the technician was physically processing textiles within a standard high-temperature gravity displacement steam autoclave. Option C. Cotton gauze is pure cellulose and acts as a massive physical sponge, depleting the hydrogen peroxide vapor instantly. This option would be correct if the technician was physically preparing consumable dressing supplies for terminal steam sterilization. Option D. Cellulose linens completely negate the gas plasma process. This option would be correct if the technician was required to physically switch the packaging material to spun-bonded high-density polyethylene Tyvek wrappers prior to loading. Concept extension. If a technician inadvertently places any item composed of cellulose into a gas plasma sterilizer, the machine internal atmospheric sensors will detect a rapid localized drop in the sterilant concentration and physically trigger an automatic abort code to prevent an unsterile release. Question 130. An SP technician is physically loading a commercial delivery truck with terminally sterilized surgical containers while the driver simultaneously loads sealed bins of biohazardous instruments returning from an off-site clinic. To strictly comply with transportation infection control laws, the technician must physically guarantee which specific logistical configuration inside the truck cargo bay? A. A solid impenetrable physical barrier completely separates the clean and soiled inventory. B. The clean items are placed exclusively on the top shelves directly above the soiled bins. C. The contaminated items are chemically sprayed with a high-level disinfectant prior to loading. D. All items are completely mixed because the vehicle climate system features physical HEPA filtration. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Transporting biohazardous materials on public roads carries massive cross-contamination and community exposure risks. The absolute prime directive for mixed-load vehicle transport is ensuring that sterile goods and contaminated soils never physically share the same airspace. The technician must ensure the vehicle features a rigid physical floor-to-ceiling partition that strictly divides the cargo bay into two isolated zones. Trap analysis. Option B. Vertical separation on shelves does not stop aerosolized blood droplets from physically drifting onto the clean containers during transit. This option would be correct if describing the strict internal loading rule for placing heavy rigid containers on the bottom shelf of a steam autoclave carriage. Option C. Disinfecting a closed bin does not decontaminate the instruments inside, nor does it override the legal separation requirement. This option would be correct if describing an unauthorized, highly dangerous attempt to manually process surgical items inside the back of a moving delivery truck. Option D. HEPA filtration manages general air quality but cannot substitute for a solid physical barrier required to stop direct liquid splashing during a traffic accident. This option would be correct if describing the specialized ventilation specifications mandated for the facility internal sterile storage room ceiling. Concept extension. In addition to the physical barrier, the technician must verify that the soiled bins themselves are rigidly constructed, completely leak-proof, securely latched, and prominently display fluorescent red biohazard warning stickers on their external surface. Question 131. While reviewing a printed case cart pull sheet for a scheduled hysterectomy, the SP technician must select specialized heavy clamping instruments. Based on the specific medical root word, the technician knows the surgeon will be physically operating on which exact anatomical organ? A. The uterus. B. The liver. C. The kidney. D. The gallbladder. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Medical terminology utilizes specific roots to identify anatomical structures. The prefix hystero directly translates to the uterus. Image of the female reproductive system uterus. Therefore, when preparing a tray for a hysterectomy, the technician understands the instruments are intended for the physical surgical excision of the patient's uterus. Trap analysis. Option B. The liver relies on the root word hepato. This option would be correct if the technician was pulling specialized retractors for a physical hepatic resection procedure. Option C. The kidney utilizes the root word nephro. This option would be correct if the surgical pick list requested physical instruments for a nephrectomy. Option D. The gallbladder utilizes the root word cholecysto. This option would be correct if the technician was dispatching a laparoscopic tray for a cholecystectomy. Concept extension. Understanding the target organ allows the technician to anticipate the physical tools required, such as prioritizing long Heine clamps utilized specifically to secure the thick ligaments surrounding the uterus. Question 132. Before physically rolling a transport cart loaded with bloody orthopedic retractors down the hospital corridor toward the decontamination zone, the SP technician ensures the solid cart doors are securely latched. This strict physical containment protocol is executed primarily to achieve which operational goal? A. To prevent the heavy metallic tools from shifting and sustaining mechanical damage during transit. B. To minimize the physical spread of pathogenic microorganisms into the public ambient environment. C. To keep the instrument sets perfectly organized and grouped by their specific surgical specialty. D. To maintain the moisture level of the enzymatic pretreatment foam applied in the surgical suite. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Transporting biohazardous surgical items through public facility hallways creates a severe risk of cross-contamination. The primary infection control mandate dictates that all soiled instruments must be completely contained within closed leak-proof carts to physically prevent infectious droplets, aerosols, and microbial life from spreading into the surrounding clean environment. Trap analysis. Option A. Preventing mechanical damage is a secondary benefit of proper handling, not the primary reason for closed carts. This option would be correct if the technician was physically securing delicate microsurgical scissors beneath a silicone pin mat inside a tray. Option C. Organizing instruments by specialty is an assembly station task, entirely unrelated to transport containment. This option would be correct if the technician was physically separating a mixed bin of clamps based on the color-coded tape on their ring handles. Option D. Retaining moisture is the goal of the point-of-use foam itself, not the structural purpose of the sealed cart doors. This option would be correct if the scenario asked why the scrub nurse sprayed the bloody retractors with a hydrating chemical before physically placing them in the bin. Concept extension. These enclosed transport carts must undergo a rigorous physical decontamination and mechanical washing cycle themselves before they can be safely returned to the clean side of the department to transport sterile goods. Question 133. While physically transferring a rack of newly washed stainless steel clamps, the SP technician must strictly navigate the facility's floor plan to maintain the required one-way workflow. This cardinal infection control principle dictates that instruments must continuously move in which specific physical direction? A. From the restricted sterile storage room back into the active operating theater. B. From the clean assembly workstations directly backward into the decontamination washroom. C. From the soiled receiving sinks progressively forward into the clean preparation and packaging area. D. From the unrestricted public hallways straight into the semi-restricted sterile supply closets. Correct answer C. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. The most critical architectural and operational design rule in sterile processing is the one-way flow of materials. To physically contain microbial contamination, soiled items must enter the decontamination area and move strictly forward into the clean assembly zone, and then into sterilization, never traveling backward against this linear path. Trap analysis. Option A. Moving items to the operating theater is distribution, not the internal departmental processing workflow. This option would be correct if the technician was pushing a fully covered case cart onto the dedicated clean service elevator bound for the physical surgical core. Option B. Moving clean items backward into the dirty wash room violates the one-way flow and immediately contaminates them. This option would be correct if describing a severe infection control breach that requires the items to be completely reprocessed from the physical beginning. Option D. Moving directly from public hallways into sterile closets bypasses clean assembly zones and introduces environmental dust. This option would be correct if describing an unauthorized vendor violating facility traffic control protocols while delivering cardboard shipping boxes. Concept extension. To enforce this physical progression, modern departments utilize pass-through washer disinfectors built directly into the walls, physically forcing technicians to load soiled items on the dirty side and retrieve the clean items on the opposite side. Question 134. While physically preparing a pneumatic tourniquet system designed to safely restrict blood flow to a patient's limb during orthopedic surgery, the SP technician recalls their foundational anatomical training regarding the human muscular system. Which distinct physiological action is an established primary function of this specific bodily system? A. Generating internal body heat through continuous physical contraction. B. Secreting digestive enzymes to chemically break down consumed complex carbohydrates. C. Filtering toxic chemical waste products directly out of the circulating bloodstream. D. Transmitting rapid electrical pain signals upward to the central nervous system. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. The human muscular system is responsible for three primary functions: facilitating physical body movement, pumping blood via the cardiac muscle, and generating body heat. Image of the human muscular system. When skeletal muscles physically contract, they burn energy and release significant thermal heat, which fundamentally maintains the patient's core body temperature. Trap analysis. Option B. Secreting enzymes is a function of the digestive system and specific glandular organs. This option would be correct if the technician was reviewing the anatomical purpose of the patient's pancreas while physically processing a biliary instrument set. Option C. Filtering chemical waste from the blood is the primary function of the urinary system. This option would be correct if the technician was preparing specialized catheters to be utilized during a complex kidney transplant procedure. Option D. Transmitting electrical pain signals is the exclusive function of the nervous system. This option would be correct if the technician was assembling a delicate microscopic tray used to repair a physical severed spinal cord bundle. Concept extension. because the muscular system generates heat. The surgical team often utilizes forced air patient warming blankets during prolonged procedures when the anesthetized muscles are temporarily paralyzed and unable to perform this physical thermal regulation. Question 135. An SP manager receives an urgent digital notification from an equipment manufacturer detailing a Class 1 recall on a specific physical batch of automated washer disinfector chemical dosing pumps. The manager immediately physically halts all wash cycles because this specific federal classification indicates what precise level of clinical danger. A severe risk where continued physical use possesses a reasonable probability of causing serious patient injury or death. B. A moderate risk where the equipment might physically cause a temporary or medically reversible adverse health condition. C. A minimal risk where the physical manufacturing defect is highly unlikely to cause any adverse patient safety outcomes. D. An administrative error where the manufacturer merely needs to update the printed paper instructions for use. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. The Food and Drug Administration categorizes medical device recalls into 3 strict classes based on the severity of the hazard. A Class 1 recall is the highest and most urgent level of danger, signifying a highly defective product where there is a reasonable probability that its continued physical use will cause serious irreversible health consequences or even patient death. Trap analysis. Option B. A moderate risk of reversible harm dictates a Class 2 recall. This option would be correct if the manufacturer identified a minor physical flaw in a sterilizer's touchscreen that occasionally caused annoying but non-lethal delays. Option C. A minimal risk where harm is highly unlikely dictates a Class 3 recall. This option would be correct if a vendor notified the hospital that the external handles on a batch of rigid transport containers were physically painted the wrong cosmetic color. Option D. Administrative paperwork updates without physical clinical danger generally do not trigger high-level emergency device recalls. This option would be correct if the vendor sent a routine mailing correcting a typo found on page 40 of the machine physical maintenance manual. Concept extension. In the event of a Class 1 recall for a critical processing component like a dosing pump, the manager must physically lock out the affected machine and manually track down every single tray processed during the defective timeframe to intercept them before surgery. Question 136. While actively assembling a laparoscopic cholecystectomy tray at the prep workstation, an SP technician must evaluate the insulated coating on a Maryland dissector to prevent intraoperative patient burns. According to established safety protocols, the technician must initiate this evaluation by executing which precise physical step first? A. Physically check the specialized collar located at the distal tip. B. Try to physically slide the external insulation backward along the shaft. C. Check the proximal ring handle for any microscopic chipping or cracking. D. Visually check the entire length of the instrument's protective shaft. Correct answer D. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Inspecting the insulation on laparoscopic instruments is critical to prevent stray electrical currents from causing severe internal burns to the patient. The absolute first step in any physical inspection process is a thorough visual examination of the entire insulated shaft under a lighted magnifier to identify any obvious macroscopic holes, nicks, or tears before moving on to tactile manipulation or electronic testing. Trap analysis. Option A. Inspecting the distal collar is a highly specific secondary step performed only after the general visual sweep of the shaft is completed. This option would be correct if the scenario asked what specific high-stress junction point requires targeted physical manipulation after the primary visual scan reveals no gross damage. Option B. Attempting to slide the insulation is a tactile physical test performed subsequent to visual inspection. This option would be correct if asking what physical manipulation the technician performs to ensure the insulative coating has not detached or loosened from the underlying metal core. Option C. The proximal ring handles do not typically house the primary electrical insulation meant to physically protect the patient's internal organs. This option would be correct if the technician was inspecting a standard hemostat for structural metal fatigue near the physical ratchet mechanism. Concept extension. If the visual inspection passes, the technician must further validate the insulation's integrity by physically passing an electronic leak tester down the entire length of the shaft to detect microscopic breaches invisible to the naked eye. Question 137. An SP inventory manager is evaluating a newly marketed brand of synthetic rigid sterilization containers to replace the department's aging blue wrap supply. During the procurement review, the manager must verify the vendor holds the proper clearance from the Food and Drug Administration, which categorizes this specific containment product under which regulatory tier? A. A Class 1 medical device. B. A Class 2 medical device. C. A Class 3 medical device. D. A Class 4 medical device. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. The Food and Drug Administration heavily regulates all sterilization packaging systems including rigid containers, peel pouches, and flat wrappers. Because a catastrophic failure of the packaging barrier poses a moderate significant risk to patient safety by allowing microbial contamination, the agency strictly classifies these packaging materials as Class 2 medical devices requiring a 510(k) pre-market notification. Trap analysis. Option A. Class 1 devices present a minimal risk of harm to the user and are subjected to the least regulatory control. This option would be correct if the manager was purchasing basic handheld stainless steel surgical retractors or physical manual cleaning brushes. Option C. Class 3 devices present a high risk of illness or injury and physically sustain human life. This option would be correct if the manager was reviewing the rigorous pre-market approval data for a permanently implantable cardiovascular pacemaker. Option D. The Food and Drug Administration classification system only features 3 tiers. Class 4 does not exist in this regulatory framework. This option would be correct if describing a completely fictional deceptive regulatory category designed to confuse physical facility auditors. Concept extension. Because rigid containers are Class 2 devices, the sterile processing technician is legally bound to rigorously follow the manufacturer's specific instructions for use regarding which internal chemical indicators and absorbent tray liners are validated for that exact model. Question 138. An SP preceptor is teaching a new hire how to select the appropriate containment device for a heavy 25-pound orthopedic drill set. The preceptor explains the absolute mandatory design parameters required for any sterile barrier system. Which of the following features is the trainee taught to disregard as an official primary objective? A. Allowing adequate physical penetration of the chosen chemical or thermal sterilant. B. Being exceptionally lightweight to allow for safe physical handling ergonomics. C. Maintaining the absolute sterility of the package contents until the moment it is opened. D. Creating a package that can be physically opened and presented aseptically to the sterile field. Correct answer B. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. All validated sterilization packaging systems share 3 uncompromising primary objectives. They must allow the sterilant to physically enter and exit. They must maintain an impenetrable barrier against microbial contamination during storage, and they must allow the unsterile circulating nurse to open them without touching the sterile contents inside. While being lightweight is operationally convenient, it is not a clinical requirement for sterility. Trap analysis. Option A. Sterilant penetration is a fundamental non-negotiable objective. This option would be correct if the trainee was asked what specific physical capability dictates the required porosity of standard medical-grade paper pouches. Option C. Maintaining the sterile barrier is the core function of the packaging after it leaves the autoclave. This option would be correct if the trainee was asked what primary objective is instantly compromised if a technician physically drags a wrapped tray across a dusty wire shelf. Option D. Aseptic presentation is a critical safety requirement designed into every approved packaging system. This option would be correct if the trainee was asked what specific surgical objective is entirely destroyed when a technician physically seals a peel pouch with chemical indicator tape. Concept extension. A heavy anodized aluminum rigid container provides excellent sterilant penetration and unparalleled barrier protection, easily fulfilling the primary objectives of packaging despite being exceptionally heavy and ergonomically burdensome to transport. Question 139. An SP technician is stationed at the manual high-level disinfection sink, preparing to submerge a delicate transesophageal echocardiography probe into a basin of orthothialdehyde. To comply with strict quality assurance standards, what is the exact required frequency for the technician to physically dip a test strip into this chemical bath to verify its minimum effective concentration? A. On a strict weekly basis prior to the Monday morning scheduled procedures. B. At least once daily before processing the first scheduled patient device. C. Each and every single time the liquid solution is utilized for a patient item. D. Exclusively when manual soaking basins are utilized instead of automated reprocessors. Correct answer C. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. High-level disinfectant solutions lose their chemical potency over time and become continuously diluted by the residual rinse water carried on wet instruments. Because a subpotent solution will fail to kill lethal pathogens, regulations strictly mandate that the technician must physically verify the liquid meets the minimum effective concentration by using a chemical test strip each and every time a new instrument is submerged. Trap analysis. Option A. Weekly testing is dangerously infrequent and completely illegal for chemical disinfectants. This option would be correct if the technician was asking how often they must physically activate and flush the emergency eyewash station mounted on the decontamination wall. Option B. Daily testing is the absolute bare minimum if the solution sits unused, but active processing demands per-use verification. This option would be correct if asking how often the dynamic air removal Bowie-Dick test must be physically run on the pre-vacuum steam sterilizer. Option D. Minimum effective concentration testing is universally required for all high-level disinfection chemicals regardless of the deployment method. This option would be correct if asking when a technician must manually record the temperature of the soaking fluid utilizing a handheld thermometer instead of relying on a machine's internal digital sensor. Concept extension. The technician must also possess a dedicated logbook to permanently record the specific pass or fail result of every individual test strip dipped alongside the exact date, time, and technician's signature to maintain complete legal traceability. Question 140. After physically pulling a fully loaded carriage from the steam autoclave and parking it in a low-traffic cooling zone, the SP technician anticipates the wait time before the items can be safely handled. The technician understands that the required physical duration for the load to reach ambient room temperature is directly dictated by which combined operational factors? A. The physical density of the items, the specific packaging materials applied, and the exact sterilization parameters utilized. B. The immediate scheduling demands of the operating room, the patience of the surgical team, and the time of day. C. The exact chemical formulation of the enzymatic detergent used in the decontamination phase prior to packaging. D. The brand name of the biological indicator utilized and the specific lot control number assigned to the daily load. Correct answer A. Knowledge point explanation. Core rationale. Cooling is a complex thermodynamic event heavily influenced by several physical variables. The total mass and density of the metal instruments dictate how much heat energy was absorbed. The packaging material such as a thick rigid container versus thin paper dictates how quickly that heat can escape, and the sterilization method itself establishes the starting thermal baseline. Trap analysis. Option B. The laws of thermodynamics cannot be physically sped up by human urgency or clinical scheduling pressure. This option would be correct if identifying the dangerous external administrative pressures that frequently tempt technicians to improperly bypass the mandatory post-sterilization cooling phase. Option C. Detergent chemistry breaks down bioburden and has absolutely zero impact on the post-sterilization thermal cooling rate of metal. This option would be correct if asking what specific operational factor strictly determines the required mechanical soaking time at the initial wash sink. Option D. tracking numbers and indicator brands are purely administrative quality assurance records entirely divorced from the physical dissipation of thermal energy. This option would be correct if asking what exact data points must be scanned into the digital tracking system to legally release the tray to the surgical core. Concept extension. Because these diverse physical factors create highly variable cooling times ranging anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours, the only authorized method to determine if a tray is fully cooled is to utilize an infrared temperature gun without physically touching the package.